The Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Coalition was unlike anything most species had ever seen. Floating platforms held representatives from 1,000 worlds, their forms ranging from clouds of light to towering crystalline structures. Today, the usual calm of the chamber was broken by waves of worried whispers and nervous movements. Admiral Voss, a being made of swirling blue energy contained within a sophisticated environmental suit, moved to the center platform. The Admiral's voice, translated through advanced systems, trembled slightly, something that had never happened before. "Honorable Council, I bring grave news," Voss began. "Our latest attempts to contain the void anomaly have failed completely. The quantum computers we relied on for generations cannot predict its behavior. Our bioengineered specialists, the finest minds we have created, cannot understand its patterns. Even our synthetic minds, with their vast processing power, are unable to find a solution." The chamber erupted in worried murmurs. On the screens floating around the chamber, real-time images showed the spreading darkness of the void anomaly. It looked like a tear in space itself, slowly eating away at the edges of reality. 3 solar systems had already been lost to its hungry advance. In the back of the chamber, Captain Li Jin watched silently. She was different from the other coalition officers. She was an alien herself, from a species that had evolved to look remarkably similar to humans. This similarity had led her to become one of the few experts on Earth and its inhabitants after their discovery 2 years ago. Li Jin's hand tightened on the datapad she held. It contained information that might save them all, but she knew how the Council would react. The Coalition prided itself on being the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's. Their scientific understanding was vastly superior. But right now, all of that meant nothing against the void that threatened to devour them all. "The void will reach the Centauri cluster within 30 days, Admiral Voss continued. "If we cannot stop it there, it will have a clear path to the core worlds. We estimate total collapse of coalition space within 1 standard year." The panic in the chamber grew. Some representatives began shouting suggestions, each more desperate than the last. "Send in the autonomous fleets. Deploy the quantum barriers. Evacuate the threatened systems." Li Jin knew none of these would work. They had already tried similar solutions. The void seemed to absorb or ignore their most advanced technology. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her boots making soft sounds on the crystal floor. "I have a suggestion," she said, her voice clear and steady. The chamber's automatic systems amplified her words, and the chaos slowly died down as all attention turned to her. "Captain Li Jin," Admiral Voss acknowledged. "You have the floor." Li Jin pulled up her datapad's display, projecting images of Earth into the chamber. 2 years ago, we discovered a species that we dismissed as primitive. Their technology is centuries behind ours. They still use fossil fuels on parts of their planet. They haven't even colonized their own solar system properly. Dismissive mumbles spread through the chamber. Li Jin continued, her voice growing stronger. "But these humans have something we lack. In my studies of their history and behavior, I've noticed patterns. They excel at facing the unknown. When their tools fail, they make new ones. When their plans fail, they improvise. When faced with impossible situations, they find ways to survive." "Captain," a crystalline being interrupted, its voice chiming like bells, "are you suggesting we seek help from primitives? This is absurd. Is it more absurd than watching our worlds die?" Li Jin challenged. She switched the display to show human achievements, their first flights, their space programs, their rapid technological advancement. In the past 100 years, they went from primitive flight to reaching their moon. In 50 years, they went from basic computers to global information networks. They don't think like us. They don't follow our logical patterns. And right now, that might be exactly what we need. Admiral Voss floated closer to the displays, studying them. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" "We need to contact Earth, Li Jin announced, her voice carrying across the chamber. We need human specialists. Not their leaders or their scientists. We need their problem solvers. Their engineers. The ones they call fixers and mechanics. The ones who solve problems with whatever tools they have at hand. The chamber erupted again, this time in protests and arguments. But Li Jin stood her ground, watching as Admiral Voss studied the human historical records with growing interest. The void anomaly defies all our advanced analysis. Li Jin pressed on. Perhaps we need a different approach. A human approach. They have a saying on Earth. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Admiral Voss turned to face the council, raising all four energy appendages for silence. When the chamber quieted, the Admiral spoke with newfound determination. Captain Li Jin's suggestion, while unprecedented, has merit. We have tried everything else. Our greatest achievements have failed us. Perhaps. The Admiral paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Perhaps it is time to try something primitive, something unpredictable. Li Jin felt relief flood through her as Admiral Voss gave the official order to establish contact with Earth. As she left the chamber to begin preparations, she smiled slightly. The coalition was about to learn what humans were truly capable of, and she had a feeling they were in for quite a surprise. The void anomaly might have defeated their greatest technology, but it had never faced human ingenuity before. And if there was one thing Li Jin had learned about humans, it was that they had a habit of doing the impossible, simply because no one told them they couldn't. Han Jai stood in the gleaming docking bay of the Coalition's flagship, clutching his battered red toolbox. He felt small among the towering alien architecture, where everything seemed to glow with an inner light. A group of Coalition scientists stood nearby, their expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly hidden disgust at his simple work clothes and scuffed boots. This is the human specialist, one of the scientists whispered, their translator making the words echo slightly. He doesn't even have a neural interface. Han pretended not to hear them. He was used to people underestimating him. 20 years of fixing things on Earth's orbital stations had taught him that the fanciest tool wasn't always the best one. Sometimes you just needed a good wrench and the ability to see what others missed. Captain Li Jin walked over to greet him, her uniform pristine and glowing with subtle technology. Welcome aboard the Stellar Wisdom, Mr. Han. I hope your journey was comfortable. Call me Han, he replied, shifting his toolbox to his other hand. And yeah, that transport ship of yours is something else. Never thought I'd travel faster than light, while sitting in what felt like a luxury hotel room. Li Jin smiled slightly. If you'll follow me, I'll show you what we're dealing with. The void anomaly has grown significantly since we first contacted Earth. They walked through corridors that seemed to bend light itself, passing beings of all shapes and sizes. Some floated, some crawled, some walked on multiple legs. Han took it all in stride. After all, he'd once fixed a broken air recycler while floating upside down in zero gravity with nothing but duct tape and spare parts. The main science lab was a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and equipment that Han couldn't even begin to understand. The void anomaly filled the central display, a massive tear in space that seemed to swallow light itself. Our best quantum computers have been analyzing it for months, one of the senior scientists explained, their crystalline form glittering. We've run millions of simulations, tested every known scientific principle. Mind if I take a closer look? Han interrupted, already walking toward the display. He pulled a worn notebook and pencil from his pocket, ignoring the shocked murmurs from the assembled aliens. He's using processed tree pulp to record data. Someone whispered in horror. Han spent the next hour studying the displays, occasionally making rough sketches and notes. He asked simple questions that made the scientists exchange worried glances. When did it start? What was happening in that region before it appeared? Has anyone tried poking it with something? Finally, he stepped back and flipped through his notes. Well, there's your problem, he said casually. You're thinking too big. The room fell silent. Admiral Voss, who had joined them earlier, floated forward. "Please explain." Han walked back to the main display and pointed to several areas. "See these patterns here, here, and here? They're not random. The void isn't spreading chaotically. It's following paths of least resistance, like water flowing downhill. Your fancy computers missed it because they were looking for complex quantum mechanics, but this is basic fluid dynamics." The scientists rushed to their stations, recalibrating their instruments to look for what Han had spotted. Data began flowing across their screens. "Impossible," one scientist muttered. He's right. The void is behaving like a liquid, but at a quantum level." "How did you see this?" Admiral Voss demanded. "What technology did you use?" Han tapped his temple. "Just my eyes and experience. Spent 15 years fixing leaks in station hydraulics. You see enough fluid behavior, you start recognizing the patterns. Doesn't matter if it's water, plasma, or apparently, space itself." Captain Li Jin was smiling now, watching as the coalition scientists scrambled to adjust their theories. "What do you suggest we do about it, Han?" He pulled out his tablet, the one piece of modern technology he carried. "Well, if it behaves like a fluid, we can use that. On the stations, when we get a serious leak, we don't try to plug it right away. That just builds up pressure and makes things worse. Instead," he pulled up a rough diagram he'd sketched, "we redirect it, guide it somewhere safe until we can fix the real problem." The scientists gathered around his simple tablet, their advanced holographic displays temporarily forgotten. Han explained his idea in simple terms, using examples from his work on the stations. To his surprise, they started asking questions. Real questions, not the dismissive ones from earlier. Admiral Voss's energy form pulsed with what might have been excitement. "This could work. It's so simple, we never even considered it. We were trying to stop the void, but we could redirect it instead. Sometimes the simple solution is the best one," Han said, quoting one of his old mentors. "Now, if you've got some basic equipment I can work with, I've got some ideas about how we might set up the redirection system." As he opened his toolbox and began pulling out simple tools that had served him well for decades, Han noticed the looks of disdain had vanished from the alien faces around him. In their place was something new. Respect, and maybe a hint of hope. "One more thing," Han added, looking up at the assembled aliens. "I'm going to need help. Not your advanced AI or quantum specialists. I need more humans, people used to fixing things with whatever they have on hand. Because what we're about to do isn't going to be pretty or elegant, but if I'm right, it'll work." Captain Li Jin nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. Welcome to the team, Han-ja." Han turned back to his notebook, adding more sketches as ideas flowed. The void might be the biggest leak he'd ever had to fix, but in the end, every problem had a solution. You just had to know where to look for it. Han Jae stood in the engine room of the Coalition's flagship, staring at the massive quantum stabilizers that powered the vessel. Next to him, Kim Sun was going through the thick manual that detailed every safety protocol and operating procedure. The room hummed with energy, and holographic warnings flashed everywhere they looked. "This isn't going to work," Han muttered, taking the manual from Kim and tossing it onto a nearby console. "We need to think differently." The Coalition's safety officer, a being made of pure golden energy named Officer Lux, hovered nervously nearby. Several alien engineers watched from a safe distance, their various appendages twitching with anxiety. "I must remind you again," Officer Lux said, its voice crackling with static. "These stabilizers are incredibly delicate. One wrong move could cause a cascade failure." Kim Sun pulled out her tablet and started making calculations. Like Han, she had spent years working on Earth's space stations, fixing problems that the instruction manuals said couldn't be fixed. "The void is getting closer to the Centauri cluster. We don't have time to do this the proper way." Han walked around the massive stabilizer rings, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. The quantum stabilizers were beautiful machines, far more advanced than anything on Earth. But right now, their advanced nature was part of the problem. They were too perfect, too rigid in their programming. "Okay, here's what we need to do," Han said, pulling tools from his box. "These stabilizers are designed to maintain perfect quantum balance. But to redirect the void, we need them to be a little unbalanced, just enough to create a quantum current." Officer Lux's energy form flickered in distress, intentionally unbalancing the stabilizers. That violates at least 17 different safety protocols. The failsafes won't even allow such modifications. Kim Sun smiled as she helped Han remove an access panel. "Sometimes you have to break things to fix them. We're not going to destroy the stabilizers. We're just going to make them work differently." The alien engineers watched in horror as Han and Kim began bypassing safety systems and rewiring complex quantum circuits. They worked quickly and confidently, using their years of experience, fixing impossible problems with limited resources. "Stop!" Officer Lux suddenly shouted. "Those modifications could cause a complete system failure. The manual clearly states." "The manual," Han interrupted, not looking up from his work, "was written for perfect conditions. We're not in perfect conditions anymore. Kim, hand me that phase wrench." Kim passed him the tool while continuing her own modifications. "Think of it like this," she explained to the distressed aliens. "When you have a ship that's sinking, you don't follow the normal operating procedures. You do whatever works to keep it afloat." The stabilizers began to pulse with an uneven rhythm that made the alien engineers back away in fear. But Han nodded in satisfaction. "That's it. We're creating quantum turbulence, like making waves in a pond. The void will follow these waves right where we want it to go." Officer Lux's energy form was practically sparking with anxiety. "The system is showing hundreds of errors. The quantum field is becoming unstable." "Not unstable," Kim corrected, checking her readings. "Just less rigid. Look at the pattern. It's exactly what we need to redirect the void anomaly." Captain Li Jin entered the engine room, drawn by the numerous alarm signals. "Report," she commanded, taking in the scene. Han straightened up, wiping his hands on his work pants. "We've modified the stabilizers to generate a quantum current. When we activate this across the fleet in sequence, it should create a path that will draw the void away from inhabited systems. By breaking every safety protocol we have," Officer Lux added frantically. Li Jin looked at the modified stabilizers, then at the confidence in Han and Kim's faces. "Will it work?" "On paper? No way," Han admitted. "In reality? Yes. We've seen this kind of thing work before, just on a much smaller scale. Sometimes you have to trust experience over theory." The captain was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Do it. I'll inform Admiral Voss that we're ready to proceed." As the captain left, Han and Kim continued their modifications, ignoring the increasingly distressed warnings from Officer Lux and the other engineers. The stabilizer's rhythm grew stronger, creating patterns in quantum space that no coalition scientist had ever dreamed of attempting. "You know what this reminds me of," Kim said as she made final adjustments. "That time on Station 7, when we had to reverse the coolant flow to prevent a core breach." Han laughed. "They said that was impossible to, but it worked. And the station didn't explode," Kim added with a grin. Officer Lux's energy form dimmed slightly. "Is explosion a likely outcome of these modifications?" "Nah," Han said, closing the last access panel. "Well, probably not. But if we don't try this, the void will definitely destroy everything anyway. Sometimes you have to risk breaking the rules to save everything." The modified stabilizers pulsed with their new rhythm, sending waves through quantum space that would soon help guide the void away from populated systems. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't by the book, but as Han and Kim had learned through years of experience, the best solutions rarely were. They had broken almost every protocol in the Coalition's manual, but they might have just found a way to save the galaxy. And if anyone complained about their methods later, Well, they could always point out that the alternative was letting everything be consumed by the void. Sometimes, breaking protocol was exactly what you needed to do to fix things. The main engineering bay of the Coalition flagship had transformed over the past week. Where once pristine order ruled, now tools and equipment lay scattered across workstations. Holographic displays showed conflicting data streams, and the air was filled with the sound of human voices arguing in what seemed like complete disorder. Park Min, a disaster response engineer from Earth's Pacific Rim, stood at the central console, pointing at a simulation of the void anomaly. Look, if we increase the quantum turbulence here, we can create a stronger current. That's crazy, Choi Yun shot back, her experience in deep-sea engineering evident in her quick calculations. The pressure would tear apart the stabilizers. We need to create multiple smaller currents instead. Han Jai and Kim Sun watched the exchange while working on their own modifications. The four humans had quickly developed a working style that horrified their alien observers, but seemed to produce remarkable results. A group of Coalition scientists stood at the edge of the room, their various forms showing signs of distress at the chaos before them. One of them, a crystalline being named Scholar Vex, was taking notes. Fascinating, Vex muttered. They appear to be operating in complete disorder, and yet, the scholar paused as Park Min suddenly shouted in excitement. That's it. Park ran to a workstation, fingers flying over the controls. Yun, you're right about the multiple currents, but what if we sync them with Han's turbulence pattern? Choi Yun rushed over, pulling up her own calculations. Yes, and if we add the resonance frequency Kim discovered. The humans gathered around the display, talking over each other, pointing at different parts of the simulation, and somehow understanding each other perfectly despite the apparent confusion. Captain Li Jin entered the bay, accompanied by Admiral Voss. The Admiral's energy form flickered with concern at the scene before them. Captain, Voss said quietly, are you certain this chaos is productive? Li Jin smiled slightly. Watch. The humans had moved from discussion to action. Park Min and Choi Yun were rapidly modifying the quantum field generators, while Han and Kim recalibrated the stabilizers to match their new calculations. They worked without any formal plan, seeming to understand each other's needs without explicit communication. Look at this, Scholar Vex announced suddenly, pointing to a data stream. The void anomaly. It's responding to their modifications. The quantum currents are actually affecting its movement. The aliens crowded around the display. For the first time since its appearance, the void was showing signs of being influenced by their efforts. The chaotic pattern of quantum currents the humans had created was having an effect that none of the Coalition's careful, coordinated attempts had achieved. Impossible, one of the alien engineers whispered. They're not following any standardized procedures. Their calculations aren't even using proper quantum mathematics. Choi Yun overheard this and laughed. Sometimes you have to stop thinking about what's supposed to work and just try what might work. Park, boost the field strength in Sector 7. The humans continued their work, their apparent chaos hiding a deeper pattern that only they seemed to understand. They argued about approaches, challenged each other's ideas, and somehow emerged with solutions that defied conventional logic but produced results. It's like watching a storm, Admiral Voss observed. Chaotic on the surface, but with underlying patterns. That's humanity for you, Captain Li Jin replied. They thrive in chaos. Where we see disorder, they see possibilities. The void anomaly was now visibly responding to their efforts. The quantum currents they had created were slowly but surely beginning to guide its movement, like a river being redirected by carefully placed barriers. Park Min stepped back from his console, wiping sweat from his forehead. We need to expand this to the entire fleet. If we can create this pattern on a larger scale, the void will have no choice but to follow our current, Choi Yun finished. Han, Kim, can your stabilizer modifications handle that kind of load? Han grinned, already working on it. Kim's got some ideas about linking the ship's quantum fields. The aliens watched in amazement as the humans dove back into their work, their creative chaos producing more progress in hours than the Coalition's careful planning had achieved in months. "I believe I understand now," Scholar Vex said thoughtfully. "Their strength lies not in following procedures, but in their ability to adapt and combine ideas in unexpected ways. Their chaos is calculated." Admiral Voss's energy form pulsed with what might have been amusement. "Perhaps we have been too rigid in our thinking. Captain, please ensure these humans have whatever resources they need." As the Admiral and Captain left the engineering bay, the sounds of productive chaos continued. The humans argued, laughed, and worked, their seemingly disorganized approach slowly but surely pushing back against the void that threatened their galaxy. The Coalition had sought help from humans expecting advanced solutions. Instead, they got chaos, creativity, and results. Sometimes that was exactly what was needed. "Hey," Park Min called out. "Who wants to help test this completely unsafe but totally brilliant idea?" The alien observers watched in horror as his fellow humans immediately volunteered, their enthusiasm for potentially dangerous experimentation both terrifying and somehow reassuring. This chaos, this willingness to try the impossible, might just be what saved them all. Red alert signals flashed throughout the Coalition flagship as the void anomaly loomed near the Centauri system. On the main bridge's display, billions of lives were represented as simple data points, all in the path of the approaching darkness. Han Jie stood before the Coalition's Emergency Council, his work uniform stained with grease and his hair messy from hours of non-stop work. Behind him, Park Min, Choi Yun, and Kim Sun waited with determined expressions. They had been working on something for the past 48 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination. "The evacuation ships can't move fast enough," Admiral Voss was saying. His energy form dimmed with exhaustion. "Even with our fastest vessels, we can only save a fraction of the population before the void arrives." Han stepped forward, pulling out his worn tablet. "We have another option." He looked at his fellow humans, who nodded encouragingly. "We've found a way to stop the void. Not just redirect it, stop it completely." The council chamber erupted in murmurs. Captain Li Jin, who had stood by the humans since the beginning, moved closer. "Explain." Kim Sun connected her tablet to the main display, showing a series of calculations that made several alien scientists gasp in horror. The equations were messy, hand-drawn at times, with notes scribbled in the margins. "Your quantum stabilizers," Han began. "They're designed to maintain perfect balance. But we've been thinking about this wrong. We don't need balance. We need controlled chaos." Park Min stepped up, pointing to specific parts of their plan. "We've been studying how your ships generate their quantum fields. With modifications, we can turn the entire fleet into what we call a resonance trap." "A what?" Admiral Voss demanded. Choi Yun took over the explanation. "Think of it like an earthquake. Small vibrations can bring down a building if they hit the right frequency. We're going to do the same thing to the void. Hit it with quantum vibrations until it collapses in on itself." The alien scientists were already shaking their heads. One crystalline being stepped forward, its form flickering with agitation. "Impossible. The energy requirements alone would be met by overloading the quantum cores." Kim Sun interrupted, showing more calculations. "Yes, it will probably destroy most of our systems, but it will work." "This is madness," Admiral Voss declared, but there was a note of hope in his voice. The Admiral had seen enough of human ingenuity to know that sometimes madness was exactly what they needed. Han pointed to a simulation they had run. "Look, we've tested it on a small scale. The void responds to quantum resonance, if we can generate enough of it, with the right pattern." "You'll destroy half the fleet," the crystalline scientist protested. "Better than losing billions of lives," Park Min countered. "Besides, we've figured out how to protect the essential systems. Most of the ships will survive, probably." Captain Li Jin studied their plans carefully. "How long do you need to set this up?" 6 hours, Han replied. But we need every ship in the fleet, and we need their crews to trust us, even when things start looking bad. The council chamber fell silent. Admiral Voss floated to the center of the room, energy form pulsing as the admiral considered the options. Outside, the void continued its relentless advance toward billions of innocent lives. "Show me exactly what you need," the admiral finally said. The next 6 hours were a blur of activity. The humans directed fleet engineers in modifying quantum cores across hundreds of ships. Safety protocols were bypassed, systems were pushed far beyond their designed limits, and everything was connected in ways that made the coalition engineers nervous. Han worked alongside his team, checking connections and making last-minute adjustments. "Remember," he told the fleet engineers, "when the resonance begins, everything's going to look like it's failing. That's normal. Don't try to fix it." Kim Sun finished her final calculations, her tablet now connected directly to the fleet's command systems. "Ready here. Pattern is set." Park Min and Choi Yun reported similar readiness from their stations. The fleet was positioned in a complex geometric pattern around the approaching void, every ship's quantum core modified to Han's specifications. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Voss gave the order, "Begin the resonance sequence, and may whatever powers exist in this universe help us all." Han activated the system. Immediately, warning alarms blared across every ship in the fleet. Quantum cores began to pulse with dangerous energy levels. The void, sensing the disturbance, seemed to pause in its advance. "Pattern holding," Kim Sun reported, her voice tense. "Resonance building." The void began to writhe, its edges becoming unstable as the quantum vibrations hit it from all sides. Coalition scientists watched in amazement as their instruments showed the impossible. The void was beginning to collapse. "More power," Han called out. "Push it to the limit." Ships groaned under the strain, their quantum cores glowing with dangerous intensity. But the void was definitely shrinking now, folding in on itself as the humans' controlled chaos tore it apart. "It's working," Admiral Voss whispered, energy form brightening with hope. The void shuddered one final time, then imploded with a flash of quantum energy that temporarily blinded every sensor in the fleet. When the displays cleared, there was nothing left but empty space where the anomaly had been. In the sudden silence, Han looked at his fellow humans and smiled tiredly. "See, sometimes you have to break things to fix them." The coalition had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most elegant solution wasn't the right one. Sometimes you needed the human touch, messy, chaotic, and brilliantly effective. 1 month after the Void Anomaly's destruction, the Coalition's Supreme Council gathered for a historic session. The Grand Chamber, usually arranged in strict hierarchical order, had been reformed into a more open configuration, a small but significant change inspired by recent events. Han Jie fidgeted in his formal Earth uniform, still unused to ceremonies and honors. Beside him, Kim Sun, Park Min, and Choi Yun looked equally uncomfortable in their dress uniforms. They were about to be presented with the Coalition's highest honor, but all 4 humans would have preferred to be back in their work clothes, fixing something. Admiral Voss floated to the center of the chamber, energy form glowing brightly. "Today we recognize not just the achievement of saving countless lives, but also the beginning of a new era for the Coalition. These humans have shown us that true advancement isn't just about having the most sophisticated technology." The Admiral gestured to the collected representatives of 1,000 worlds. "Look at what we have become. Our civilization achieved wonders, but we became trapped by our own perfection. We forgot how to adapt, how to think beyond our established patterns." Han watched as holographic displays showed their desperate battle against the void. The modified ships, the chaotic but effective strategies, the moments when everything looked like it would fall apart, but somehow worked perfectly. "When we first discovered Earth," Captain Li Jin added, stepping forward, "we saw a primitive world still struggling with basic space travel. We failed to see what made them special, their creativity, their ability to improvise, their willingness to try the impossible simply because no one told them they couldn't. Scholar Vex, who had documented the entire crisis, presented their findings. The humans succeeded not despite their primitive technology, but because they weren't limited by advanced solutions. They saw possibilities where we saw only established procedures. Han shifted uncomfortably as the scholar displayed their improvised calculations and rough sketches. To his surprise, these were now being studied by coalition scientists as examples of adaptive problem-solving methodology. The Supreme Council's leader, a being of pure thought and energy, addressed the chamber. We hereby extend full membership in the coalition to Earth and humanity. But more than that, we acknowledge our need to learn from them. Each coalition vessel will now include human engineering teams. Our research facilities will adopt their collaborative methods. Kim Sun leaned over to whisper to Han, "Did we just change an entire civilization by breaking their stuff?" Han tried not to laugh. "Looks like it. Though I still say we were just doing our jobs." The ceremony continued as each human received their honor, a crystalline star that shimmered with quantum energy. But the real changes were already spreading throughout coalition space. In engineering bays across the fleet, rigid workstations were being reorganized into more flexible configurations. Coalition engineers were learning to question established procedures, to consider unconventional solutions. Some were even starting to keep simple tools handy, just in case the advanced ones failed. After the ceremony, Han and his team found themselves surrounded by alien engineers eager to learn their methods. One crystalline being asked very seriously, "Could you explain this duct tape substance you keep mentioning?" Park Min grinned. "Better yet, we'll show you how to use it. Sometimes the simplest solution really is the best one." The void anomaly had threatened to destroy civilization, but in facing that threat, the coalition had gained something invaluable. They learned that true advancement wasn't about having the most sophisticated solution, but about being able to find new solutions when the old ones failed. Captain Li Jin found Han later in the flagship's engineering bay, already back in his work clothes, and teaching some alien engineers about improvised repairs. "You know," she said, "there's talk of building a memorial to commemorate the crisis." Han looked up from his work. "Really? What kind?" "They wanted something grand and complex." Li Jin smiled, "But I suggested something simpler. Just a basic toolkit, like yours, displayed in the council chamber. To remind us that sometimes the most powerful tools are the simplest ones." The story spread throughout coalition space, how a few humans with basic tools and creative minds had saved them all. It became a legend, taught to young engineers and scientists as a lesson in thinking differently. And if visitors to Earth were surprised to find humans still using simple tools and basic technology alongside their advanced coalition equipment, they soon understood. Humanity's strength wasn't in having the most advanced solutions, but in knowing when to use simple ones. As Han had said during the crisis, sometimes you had to break things to fix them. The coalition had broken free of its rigid thinking, and in doing so, had become stronger than ever. And somewhere in the Grand Council chamber, a worn red toolbox sat in a place of honor, reminding everyone that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't advanced technology. It was the ability to think differently when everything else failed. End of story.